You're listening to the Bare Metal Cyber Prepcast, created to help you succeed in your PMP certification journey. Learn more at baremetalcyber.com, where additional prepcasts, books, and training materials await. Let's get started. Engaging stakeholders means more than sending them reports or inviting them to a kickoff meeting. It is the systematic process of identifying who is affected by the project, analyzing their interests and influence, planning how to engage them, and then building relationships that allow decisions to be made on time and with confidence. The formal definition is to systematically identify, analyze, plan, and engage stakeholders to co-create value. The outcomes of this task include timely approvals, reduced resistance, and alignment of expectations before issues escalate. The project manager acts as both facilitator and integrator, weaving together voices from across the organization. On the exam, this concept often appears in stems describing silent blockers, conflicting priorities, or late-breaking surprises. Stakeholder engagement is not a one-time event. It is continuous throughout the project. Too often, new project managers assume that stakeholder analysis done at kickoff is, quote, complete. In reality, priorities shift. New stakeholders emerge, and old ones may lose influence. Engagement must adapt to these dynamics, or else the project risks running into avoidable resistance later. Think of engagement as a living system rather than a static document. On the exam, the correct answer often emphasizes adapting stakeholder engagement throughout the life of the project, rather than treating it as a front-loaded task. The stance of the project manager in this domain is proactive facilitation. Stakeholders rarely align themselves naturally. The project manager creates the conditions for alignment. This means clarifying terms, creating safe forums for discussion, and making trade-offs visible. Engagement also requires integration, ensuring that the perspectives of technical experts, executives, and end users all feed into decision-making. When PMI tests this area, look for answers that involve facilitation and integration, not avoidance or unilateral decision-making by the project manager. Identifying and analyzing stakeholders is the foundation of engagement. Stakeholders can be mapped along several dimensions: their level of interest in the project, their influence over outcomes, their potential impact, their attitude toward the project, and their proximity to the work. Simple tools such as an interest-influence grid help prioritize attention, but project managers must look deeper than just titles. Hidden stakeholders, operations staff, security teams, regulators, or end users may not appear in early rosters, but often carry significant constraints. On the exam, distractor answers often ignore these hidden roles. PMI expects you to surface them proactively. Mapping is not enough. It must be updated continuously. A stakeholder who was supportive may become resistant when scope shifts, or a quiet influencer may gain importance as deadlines approach. Treat stakeholder maps as living artifacts that evolve with the project. Recording expectations, constraints, and potential conflicts in these maps ensures that engagement strategies remain grounded in reality. On the exam, stems often highlight surprises late in the project. The correct answer usually involves recognizing that maps were static and need to be refreshed. PMI stresses avoid, set, and forget. Stakeholder analysis also means understanding motivations. A compliance officer may prioritize risk reduction, while a marketing manager may emphasize speed to market. Recording these drivers prevents conflicts from being framed as personal disagreements when they are really differences in incentives. By capturing these dynamics early, the project manager can design engagement strategies that anticipate conflict rather than react to it. On the exam, correct answers typically emphasize capturing constraints and potential conflicts upfront rather than dealing with them ad hoc. Planning engagement transforms analysis into strategy. For each stakeholder, the project manager defines objectives. Should they be informed, consulted, co-creating decisions, or ultimately deciding? Methods are then tailored accordingly. Workshops, Interviews, demos, and prototypes may be used for collaborative stakeholders, while dashboards and reports may suffice for those needing only updates. Matching frequency and channels to decision moments ensures relevance. For example, daily stand-ups may be appropriate for team leads but not for executives. On the exam, look for answers that emphasize deliberate planning matched to roles, rather than generic one-size-fits-all approaches. Another crucial aspect of planning is assigning owners. Stakeholder engagement is not the sole responsibility of the project manager. Technical leads, product owners, or functional managers may own specific relationships. Documenting these responsibilities in the engagement plan clarifies who maintains which connection. This distributes the workload and ensures no key relationship falls through the cracks. On the exam, distractors often suggest that the project manager must personally manage all stakeholders. Correct answers highlight shared responsibility with clear ownership. Executing engagement is where plans turn into daily practice. The project manager facilitates shared understanding, confirming terms and acceptance criteria, so stakeholders do not operate on conflicting definitions. Closing feedback loops visibly as essential. Stakeholders must see how their input changed outcomes. This builds trust and prevents disengagement. Managing conflict requires focusing on interests rather than positions, negotiating trade-offs transparently. Documenting decisions and keeping a single source of truth ensures everyone operates from the same baseline. On the exam, correct answers usually involve facilitation, feedback loops, and decision logs rather than passive reporting. Closing the loop is particularly important. Stakeholders who provide input but never see results lose motivation. A simple practice is to highlight in meetings. This requirement was adjusted based on feedback from last review. This shows respect and reinforces that engagement matters. On the exam, STEMs may describe stakeholder disengagement, and the best answer involves visibly closing loops, not just increasing report frequency. PMI stresses that engagement is about influence and inclusion, not volume of updates. Conflict is inevitable, but engagement strategies treat it constructively. By framing discussions around interests, value, risk, constraints, rather than rigid positions, the project manager helps stakeholders find integrative solutions. For example, one group may want earlier delivery while another wants more testing. By surfacing the interests, speed versus quality, the project manager can negotiate balanced trade-offs. On the exam, answers that stress negotiation, facilitation, and trade-offs usually align with PMI's philosophy, while answers that escalate prematurely often do not. Execution also requires disciplined documentation. Decision logs, change logs, and single sources of truth ensure that agreements do not vanish into side emails or hallway conversations. This preserves governance and prevents rework. PMI expects project managers to log decisions formally, even if they seem minor at the time. On the exam, distractors often suggest informal agreements. The correct answer emphasizes documenting once, linking everywhere. Monitoring and adapting engagement is an ongoing responsibility. Signals that strategy needs adjustment include stakeholder silence, repeated rework, or frequent "I thought you meant" conversations. These symptoms indicate that alignment is slipping and that engagement tactics must evolve. On the exam, correct answers typically involve recognizing these signals and adjusting strategy, not blaming individuals. PMI emphasizes adaptation as a continuous cycle. Resegmenting stakeholders is often necessary as projects evolve. A stakeholder who was peripheral may become critical during deployment. Adjusting cadence and forums ensures they are engaged appropriately. Engagement quality can be measured. Are decisions made promptly? Is cycle time to approval decreasing? Are conflicts resolved faster? Linking risks and issues back to stakeholder dynamics ensures visibility. On the exam, STEMs often show bottlenecks in approvals. Correct answers emphasize adapting stakeholder strategies rather than pushing the team harder. In summary, the first half of stakeholder engagement covers identification, analysis, planning, execution, and monitoring. Stakeholders must be mapped, hidden ones surfaced, and motivations captured. Plans must define objectives, methods, frequency, and ownership. Execution must focus on facilitation, conflict management, and visible feedback loops. Monitoring ensures continuous adaptation. On the exam, correct answers consistently reflect PMI's belief that engagement is proactive, inclusive, and documented, not reactive, one-time, or informal. For more cyber-related content and books, please check out cyberauthor.me. Also, there are other prepcasts on cybersecurity and more at baremetalcyber.com. Stakeholder engagement plays out differently in agile and predictive environments, but the principles remain consistent. Agile settings rely on continuous touchpoints, sprint reviews, backlog refinement, and demos where stakeholders see real progress and provide feedback. Prioritization happens through backlog order, which gives transparency into which features or requirements matter most. Predictive projects, by contrast, rely on stage gates, formal sign-offs, and structured communication plans. Hybrid projects combine both, protecting agile cadence while honoring governance checkpoints. On the exam, clues such as, quote, sprint demo or sign-off meeting point toward the context, and the correct answer is usually the one that adapts engagement practices to the delivery mode while keeping alignment intact. Translating between agile and predictive artifacts is often the project manager's hidden responsibility. A backlog item that shifts priority must be reflected in updated scope documentation or baseline schedules if the environment is predictive. In hybrid projects, backlog refinements should connect directly to milestone expectations, ensuring executives who operate in predictive mindsets still understand progress. This translation is essential because stakeholders speak different languages depending on their role and environment. On the exam, the correct choice is usually the one that ensures visibility across both agile and predictive artifacts, creating a single shared understanding. Difficult stakeholders present one of the most common real-world challenges, and the exam reflects this reality. Before escalating, the project manager should diagnose the root cause. Is resistance due to unmet needs, conflicting incentives, risk perceptions, or lack of bandwidth? By identifying what drives the behavior, the project manager can design engagement strategies that are more likely to work. Evidence and options are powerful tools. Showing data, presenting trade-offs, and clarifying constraints helps move conversations from emotion to rational decision-making. On the exam, the correct answer typically involves facilitation and analysis, not immediate escalation. Stakeholders may resist for reasons beyond the project's control, such as competing organizational priorities. In these cases, transparency is vital. Clarifying trade-offs helps them see the organizational consequences of delay or resistance. For example, pushing back on testing resources may save budget in one department but increase risk across the organization. By framing conversations around evidence and trade-offs, the project manager positions themselves as a neutral facilitator. Escalation should remain the last resort, only after facilitation has failed. On the exam, the right answers often stress professional neutrality and structured negotiation. Relationships with difficult stakeholders must also remain professional and transparent. It is easy to slip into back-channel agreements or to personalize conflict. Both are mistakes. Project managers should keep discussions visible, documenting agreements and decisions in formal logs. Confidentiality may be necessary in sensitive topics, but decisions must always enter the project's single source of truth. On the exam, distractors often include side conversations or quick fixes without documentation. PMI's philosophy is clear. Stakeholder engagement is a governance activity, and transparency protects both the project and the relationships. Consider a scenario. Two high-influence stakeholders disagree on the scope of user acceptance testing. The project manager has 4 choices. Pick one side and move forward. Escalate immediately to the sponsor. Facilitate a joint session using project benefits and constraints to align scope and acceptance criteria, or quietly run a pilot test with one group. The best action is to facilitate a joint session, align on benefits and constraints, and update the acceptance criteria and decision log. On the exam, correct answers typically stress facilitation and documentation, not avoidance, shortcuts, or premature escalation. If this scenario occurred in an agile environment, resolution might happen during backlog refinement or sprint planning. The disagreement would be reframed into backlog priorities and clarified through the definition of done or the definition of ready. Agile ceremonies are built for surfacing and resolving these conflicts early. The exam may present a variation where stakeholder conflict hides behind agile vocabulary. The right answer usually involves backlog reordering and using agreed definitions, not deferring decisions or allowing ambiguity to persist. PMI wants candidates to recognize the alignment of stakeholder engagement practices across delivery modes. Exam pitfalls around stakeholder engagement often involve shallow or one-way communication. Broadcasting status reports may feel like engagement, but stakeholders are not truly involved in decisions. Another pitfall is ignoring quiet or indirect stakeholders who may control critical constraints, such as compliance teams or operations staff. A third is committing to scope or schedule changes without alignment from key stakeholders, which creates later resistance. Finally, failing to update artifacts after agreements leaves the team vulnerable to rework and disputes. On the exam, these pitfalls frequently appear as tempting distractors. Correct answers emphasize inclusive, documented engagement. Ignoring quiet stakeholders is another subtle but dangerous pitfall. Security officers, regulatory reviewers, or operations teams may not speak up, but can block deployment if overlooked. Engagement requires proactively surfacing these voices and ensuring they are included in planning and reviews. On the exam, distractors often focus only on vocal or high-profile stakeholders. Correct answers usually highlight inclusion of hidden or quiet stakeholders, because PMI stresses that their constraints must be addressed early, not discovered at the end. Another common trap is committing to changes without stakeholder alignment. A project manager may feel pressured to promise scope adjustments or schedule accelerations, but unless stakeholders agree, those commitments undermine trust. PMI's philosophy is that stakeholder alignment comes before commitments. On the exam, options that involve unilateral promises are usually wrong. Correct answers emphasize validating with stakeholders, aligning expectations, and documenting changes before updating baselines. Engagement precedes commitment, not the other way around. Failing to update artifacts after agreements is another mistake. Handshake agreements or undocumented commitments erode governance. Decisions must be recorded in logs, scope baselines, or backlog items so the entire team shares a single truth. On the exam, distractors often suggest informal agreements, but PMI always prefers documented traceability. Engagement is only sustainable when decisions are visible, auditable, and linked to project artifacts. A quick playbook summarizes stakeholder engagement. Step 1. Map stakeholders continuously, surfacing hidden ones and refreshing analysis as context changes. Step 2. Plan engagement deliberately, defining objectives, methods, frequency, and ownership. Step 3. Execute by facilitating alignment, managing conflict, and closing feedback loops visibly. Step 4. Adapt engagement strategy as signals appear, such as silence, rework, or delayed approvals. Throughout, log decisions in a single source of truth. On the exam, correct answers often align closely with this playbook: proactive mapping, structured planning, facilitation, adaptation, and documentation. Balancing governance with cadence is the final discipline. Engagement must be frequent enough to keep momentum, but structured enough to respect organizational controls. Escalation is a valid tool, but only after facilitation and impact analysis have been attempted. PMI emphasizes that the project manager's role is to integrate stakeholder voices, not bypass them. On the exam, the correct answer usually reflects balance-protecting cadence while honoring governance, escalating last, and always maintaining transparency. In conclusion, engaging stakeholders is about systematically involving the right people at the right times in ways that align expectations, reduce resistance, and enable decisions. Agile, predictive, and hybrid environments demand different tactics, but the principles are constant: proactive mapping, tailored engagement, facilitation of conflicts, visible documentation, and continuous adaptation. Exam pitfalls usually involve one-way reporting, ignoring quiet voices, or skipping documentation. PMI's message is clear: stakeholder engagement is the backbone of alignment, and effective project managers treat it as a continuous cycle of facilitation, adaptation, and transparency. Thanks for tuning in to the Bare Metal Cyber Prepcast, your trusted source for cybersecurity news and insights. Remember to subscribe at baremetalcyber.com so you never miss an update. And visit cyberauthor.me for best-selling cybersecurity books that equip you with expert knowledge. Until next time, stay secure and stay vigilant.